She spent 3 years learning to love a man who never once planned to keep her. The night she discovered the truth, she didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply disappeared and left behind the one thing he could never take back. Drop a comment below and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. If it moves you, hit that like button and follow the channel so you never miss what comes next. This one goes deep. Stay until the end. None. The dinner was still warm when Amara Okoye's life ended. She'd made ofe onugbu the way Ji-hwan liked it, not the way her grandmother taught her, not the way it was supposed to taste, but toned down, adjusted, softened at every edge so a Korean man who grew up eating doenjang gai and grilled pork belly wouldn't wrinkle his nose at the bitterness. 3 years of adjustments, 3 years of shrinking flavors, shrinking habits, shrinking herself into whatever shape fit neatly beside Kang Ji-hwan's life without disturbing anything. She'd packed the container in a thermal bag, flagged a private car because the Black Serpent Syndicate's penthouse sat on the 42nd floor of a building on Apgujeong Row that didn't technically exist on any public property record, and told herself tonight was different. Tonight she was going to say the things she'd been practicing in the mirror for 2 weeks. The question that felt bigger than any of the dangers she'd quietly absorbed by loving a man who ran the most feared criminal organization in Seoul. She wanted to ask him about the future. Their future. She had even decided she didn't need a diamond. Just a decision. Just an answer. The private elevator opened directly into the foyer of his penthouse. The security panel accepted her biometrics without delay. Ji-hwan had coded her into the building's system 18 months ago, had pressed her thumb to the scanner himself with something close to tenderness, had said, in the particular low voice he reserved only for moments when no one else was present, that he wanted her to be able to reach him anytime she needed. She'd believed him. She'd built an entire future on moments exactly like that one. She heard the voices before she reached the living room. The foyer was long and marble-floored, and her shoes made no sound. Ji-hwan kept his penthouse like a surgery. Clean lines, no clutter, everything chosen for function rather than warmth. She'd tried once to hang a woven textile she'd brought back from Lagos near the window overlooking Han River, something with deep indigo threads her mother had pressed into her hands before her first international flight. Ji-hwan had kissed her temple and moved it to the guest bedroom without explanation and without cruelty, and somehow that had been worse than a fight. She stopped walking. The voices were coming from the main living room. She could see the edge of the conversation pit through the gap in the frosted glass partition. Low leather sofas arranged around a coffee table that cost more than most people's cars, and the soft amber glow of the overhead lights Ji-hwan preferred at this hour. She counted at least 4 men from the sound of it, his captains. She recognized the deeper register of Min Seok-hyun, the syndicate's head of territorial operations, and the cough that punctuated every third sentence from Park Dong-chul, who ran the financial side. She heard Ji-hwan laugh. It was a real laugh, not the controlled, closed-mouth sound he offered in public, or the polite exhale he gave business associates. It was the laugh she thought belonged only to her, open and low and completely relaxed. He was comfortable. He was among people who didn't require him to perform anything. The Choi family meeting is confirmed for next month, Min Seok-hyun said. Old Choi Beom-seok wants to discuss the Eastern District arrangement, and he mentioned again his daughter. A pause. Choi Yeon, Dong-chul's voice. Mild, almost careful. Ji-hwan made a sound in the back of his throat, not dismissal, something more like acknowledgement. She's 26, sharp. Her father trained her to inherit. He's offering a direct alliance. Marriage would consolidate the Eastern operations and kill the Lim faction's argument that the Black Serpent's leadership has no generational plan. Amara stood still in the foyer with the thermal bag in both hands and the handle of it pressing into her palm hard enough to leave a mark. What about, someone began. It's a clean solution, Ji-hwan said. The laugh was gone. This was his other voice, the one that made grown men stop breathing. Choi Yeon has the bloodline, the connections, the understanding of how this world operates. A marriage like that doesn't just solve the Eastern question. It sends a message to every rival family that the Black Serpent isn't going to fragment. And Amara? Min Seok-hyun asked. She felt the name leave her body. The silence from the living room lasted maybe 2 seconds. In her memory, in every version of the next few years, she would carry this night through. That silence would last much longer. Amara is... Jihuan paused. She heard the soft sound of glass being set down. She's not a factor in that conversation. She's been with you 3 years, boss. I know how long she's been with me. She's going to expect... I know what she expects. His voice was flat, patient, the way he spoke when he had already processed something completely and simply needed the room to catch up. She's brilliant, and she's been good to me. I'm beautiful, and she's been good to me. I'm not blind to what she is. But Amara is not. Another pause, and then something that sounded almost like he was choosing the precise word he needed, the way a surgeon chooses an instrument. She's not the foundation of what I'm building. She never was. What I have with her is real, but it doesn't answer the question of succession. It doesn't answer the bloodline question. It doesn't give this organization the alliance it needs going into the next decade. Dongchul said something low she couldn't catch. Jihuan's response came without hesitation. I'd rather die than marry her. That's not a difficult sentence for me to say. Amar's hands stopped shaking. She wasn't sure when they had started. Then why? Said a voice she hadn't yet placed in the conversation, quieter than the others, closer to the partition. Are you wasting her life? She knew the voice. Seo Taijun, Jihuan's right hand, his oldest friend in any world, criminal or otherwise. A man she had always understood to be the one other person in Seoul's underworld who operated from something resembling a moral center, even if that center was buried under 20 years of violence and loyalty. The silence that followed Taejun's question was different from the one before it. It had texture. It had weight. That's not your question to ask, Jihuan said. I'm asking it anyway. Taejun, she spent 3 years in this world for you. You know what that costs a person. You know what she gave up. What she gave up was her choice. No anger, no defensiveness, just precision. Nobody asked her to stay. Amara set the thermal bag down on the marble floor of the foyer without making a sound. She was not shaking. She was not crying. There was something happening in her chest that she couldn't name. Not pain exactly, more like the physical recognition of a truth she had already known in her body for some time, but refused to translate into language. She looked at the thermal bag on the floor. She had adjusted the bitterness of her grandmother's recipe. She had adjusted it for him. She picked up her keys from her coat pocket and turned around and walked back to the elevator. She pressed the button and watched the numbers count down and kept her breathing steady, and did not look back at the frosted glass partition where the amber light still glowed and the voices of men who ran Seoul's criminal architecture were still talking, without urgency, as though no one in that room had just described the woman standing 40 feet away as a convenience with an expiration date. The elevator arrived. She stepped inside. The door closed. She rode down 42 floors in silence with her hands at her sides and the ghost of a thermal bag still pressing into her palm. It was 11:47 at night. By morning, she was gone. She left the ring on his desk. Not his nightstand, not the kitchen counter, not some surface where sentiment might soften the message. His desk, the place where he made decisions. She placed it in the center of the desk's surface without ceremony, and because she still knew the penthouse's schedule the way she knew her own heartbeat, she timed her return for the 40-minute window when the night security rotation left the service elevator unwatched. She was in and out in under 6 minutes. She took nothing that was his. She took everything that was hers, which wasn't much, because she had understood on some level even before tonight that she had never truly moved herself into this life. She had only been visiting. The ring was platinum. He'd given it to her on the 1-year mark in a restaurant that required reservations made 9 months in advance, and she had read the gesture as a promise and had told her mother, who wept, and had told her best friend Chisum Adeyemi, who pulled her close and said, "Be careful, baby. Be very careful of men who give you jewelry before they give you truth." Amara had told Chisum she was being dramatic. Amara had told her mother she had found something rare. Amara had continued adjusting her grandmother's recipe. She took a cab to Chisum's apartment in Mapogu because she hadn't been able to afford her own place in a long time, and she'd told herself that was convenience and proximity, and nothing else. Chisum answered the door in 30 seconds, with her hair wrapped and her face carrying the particular alertness of someone who has spent years waiting for a phone call they knew would eventually arrive. She looked at Amara once. She didn't say, "I told you." She stepped back and opened the door wider and said, "Come inside," and made tea and sat across from Amara at the small kitchen table without speaking for almost 10 minutes. Because Chisom had known Amara since they were 19 years old in a university architecture studio in Lagos, and she understood that Amara needed silence before she needed anything else. Amara told her what she'd heard. Every word. Chisom's face didn't change. Her hands around the tea mug stayed still. When Amara finished speaking, Chisom said, "You left the ring." "Yes." "You went back and left it on his desk." "Yes." "Did you see him?" "No." Chisom nodded slowly. "Good." Amara slept in Chisom's spare room that night and did not cry. She lay in the dark and listened to the sound of soul moving outside the window and felt the strangeness of a body that understood something had ended before the mind had fully processed what it meant. 3 years. 1,000 small adjustments. A recipe she had made wrong on purpose because she had believed, with the specific and particular foolishness of a woman in love, that adjusting herself was the same as fitting in, and fitting in was the same as being chosen. She hadn't been sleeping more than 2 hours when Chisom knocked softly and came in and sat on the edge of the bed. "He's looking for you." Amara turned her head. "Already?" "It's 4 in the morning and there are 2 black serpent vehicles parked on my street." Chisom's voice was level. "He must have come home and found the ring. Whoever he sent is being subtle about it. They're not knocking yet. They might be under instructions to confirm location before making contact." Amara stared at the ceiling. "He's not going to let this be clean." "No," Chisom agreed. "He's not. I'm not going back. I know. I need you to understand that. I need you to understand that no matter what he says or what he sends or what version of himself he shows up as, I am not going back." Chisom put her hand over Amara's in the dark. "I understand. Now listen to me. I have a cousin in Yongsan-gu who doesn't know either of our names in relation to this situation. We're going to his place before daylight, and we're going to figure out the rest from there. You understand?" Amara sat up. "Okay. Get your shoes." They left Chisom's apartment at 4:15 through the building's basement exit, carrying nothing that couldn't fit in 2 shoulder bags. Amara looked at the street once as they moved through the alley and saw the unmarked black sedan and the quiet way it was parked, and felt the full weight of what it meant to have loved someone who commanded that kind of reach. He would find her. Maybe not today. Maybe not this week. But Jihuan had not built an organization that controlled the eastern and central districts of Seoul's criminal infrastructure by accepting that things simply disappeared. He would look. He would look the way he did everything, methodically, completely, without allowing emotion to interfere with process. But he had also said, clearly and without hesitation, in a room full of men who respected him, that he would rather die than marry her. She kept walking. The penthouse was silent when Jihuan returned from his study and found the ring. He stood at his desk for a long time without moving. The overhead lights were off. The city spread out 42 floors below him, and the Han River reflected the towers of Gangnam in long, shimmering columns of light, and he stood in the dark with a platinum ring in his palm and tried to remember the last time he had been surprised by anything. He couldn't. He was always 3 steps ahead. He had built his entire existence on the premise that nothing moved faster than his ability to anticipate it. He had risen through the black serpent hierarchy from a 17-year-old runner to the man who sat at its head not because he was the most violent, though he was capable of that, but because he was the most patient. He read people the way other men read contracts, looking for the clause that would eventually be leveraged against him, cataloging weaknesses before they became threats. He had survived rivals, betrayals, attempts on his life from factions that no longer existed because he had seen them coming and positioned himself accordingly. He had not seen this, and the part of his mind that was always evaluating, always strategic, turned the ring over in his fingers and noted with something like clinical discomfort that she had done the one thing he never planned for. She had not confronted him. She had not given him the scene. She had not cried or screamed or given him a moment he could manage. She had simply removed herself. She had left no opening. There was nothing to negotiate with, no argument to dismantle, no emotion to redirect. She had gone silent, which was, he understood with sudden cold clarity, the one language he had no answer for. He called Min Sok-hyun. "Find her," he said. "Boss, tonight. Every contact, every camera, every district informant. I want her location by sunrise." A pause. "It's 4 in the morning. I'm aware." He hung up. He did not call Tae-jun. Tae-jun had been the one to ask why he was wasting her life. And Ji-hwan sat with that question in the dark of his penthouse and felt something he hadn't felt in a long time scrape against the inside of his ribs. Not guilt. He didn't have the architecture for guilt. Something closer to the recognition of a mistake made clearly and in full knowledge, which was worse, because mistakes made in ignorance could be explained. This was a miscalculation. He had calculated that Amara would stay. He had calculated that she would absorb what needed to be absorbed and remain because people who loved deeply found ways to remain regardless of what they were given. He had calculated wrong. He sat in the dark with the ring until first light. The city below him did not notice. Sunrise found him in the same chair. Min Seok-hyun's people had confirmed Amara was not at her registered address, an apartment in Gangnam-gu she hadn't used regularly for months because she spent most of her time at the penthouse, and that her friend Chisum Adeyemi had vacated her Mapo-gu residence sometime before dawn, which indicated planning. Amara had been calm enough to plan. That meant she had made her decision before she left the building, which meant the ring on the desk wasn't an impulse. It was a conclusion she'd reached while standing in his foyer listening. She'd been in the building while they were talking. He worked through the implications of that with his hands flat on his desk and the ring sitting beside them. She had come to see him. She had arrived with the specific small domesticity of the woman who brought him food when she thought he was working too late, and she had stood 40 feet away and heard everything, and she had made a decision in silence and left and executed it without giving him any opening at all. His phone rang. Tae-jun. He let it ring 4 times before answering. "You knew she was in the building," Tae-jun said. Not a question. "I know now." "The security system logs every biometric entry. I pulled it this morning." His voice was even, not accusatory, not satisfied. Just the flat register of a man delivering information. She arrived at 11:39. She left at 11:52. 13 minutes. 13 minutes. She had heard everything she needed in 13 minutes, and then she had gone home in the dark and packed whatever she needed and left a ring on his desk without leaving a single other word. "Tae-jun." "Yeah." "What you said last night, in front of the others." Silence. "You were right. It cost him something to say it. He said it anyway. I don't know what that changes, but you were right." He heard Tae-jun breathe in the pause. "What are you going to do?" Ji-hwan looked at the ring. He looked at the city. He thought about the Choi family meeting next month and the Eastern District alignment and the question of succession that had no answer yet. And he thought about the Ofe Onugbu she adjusted because she thought he wouldn't like the bitterness, and the textiles she brought from Lagos that he moved without thinking because he had not been paying attention to what it cost her to bring it here. "Find her," he said. "Bring her back." A long pause. "Different from the others." "Ji-hwan," Tae-jun said quietly. "You're the one who told her to leave. You just didn't say it to her face." The line went dead. Ji-hwan sat very still in his chair with the dead phone in his hand and the ring on the desk, and the full weight of Seo Tae-jun's last sentence sitting on his chest like something structural had shifted in the building, and he hadn't heard the crack until now. He gave the order to find her anyway, because he was Kang Ji-hwan, and Kang Ji-hwan did not accept that things were simply over. Not organizations, not partnerships, not women who brought him food at midnight and adjusted their recipes so he wouldn't have to taste anything unfamiliar. He deployed his entire network. He waited. 3 weeks passed. They found nothing. Not because Amara was hiding with particular sophistication. She was a structural architect, not a criminal, and she had no training in disappearing. She found nothing because Amara Okoye had spent 3 years quietly building nothing in Seoul outside of Ji-hwan's orbit. She had no property in her name. She had no social circle that existed independent of his world. She had one friend in this city, Chisom. And Chisom had known enough to move them somewhere that couldn't be easily traced. The network that Ji-hwan had built to track rivals, to surveil territories, to monitor the movement of men with resources and training and years of criminal infrastructure behind them, found itself completely ineffective against a woman who had simply chosen to not be found. Min Seo-kyun reported back on day 21. She hasn't used her bank account since the night she left. She hasn't contacted any of her previous colleagues at the architectural firm. Her phone has been off since day 1. Ji-hwan stared at the surface of his desk. She planned this. I think, Min Seo-kyun said carefully, that she planned this the moment she walked into this building. Ji-hwan said nothing. There's something else. A pause. One of our informants works cultural events, private gallery openings, community functions. There's a Nigerian Cultural Association evening in 3 weeks in Itaewon. It's possible. Watch it, Ji-hwan said, discreetly. I want to know if she's there. Min Seo-kyun nodded and left. The penthouse was very quiet. On his desk, alongside the operational reports and the territory maps and the correspondence from the Choi family's attorneys, the platinum ring caught the morning light and threw a small arc of brightness across the surface that Ji-hwan did not look at directly but could not stop being aware of. The meeting with the Choi family was in 11 days. Choi Byum-seok's daughter was 26 and sharp and trained to inherit. Ji-hwan picked up the report on Eastern District operations and read it through twice and absorbed none of it. He looked at the ring. He looked at the city. 3 weeks ago, he'd said he would rather die than marry her. He was starting to understand with the specific and total devastation of a man who has always been right and is now comprehensively wrong, that the dying had already happened. He just hadn't been the one to do it. The cultural event in Itaewon was a Thursday evening, and Chisholm had spent 2 weeks arguing with Amara about whether attending was wisdom or recklessness, and Amara had spent 2 weeks telling her she could not disappear completely from her own life, that disappearing from Ji-hwan's world was not the same as disappearing from the world itself, and that if she never left Chisholm's cousin's spare room again, she was going to lose something more important than her safety. She was going to lose the version of herself that had existed before Seoul's criminal underworld had quietly consumed 3 years of her life. She wore something she'd bought the week before with cash from savings she kept in a separate account. Chisholm's cousin had helped her access. A deep green wrap dress, because green was the color she always reached for when she was trying to remind herself of something. She did her hair the way she'd worn it before Ji-hwan, natural and full, and taking up whatever space it wanted to take. And she stood in the bathroom mirror for a long time, and looked at her own face without the specific internal arithmetic she'd been running for 3 years. The calculation of whether she was too much or too little or too foreign or too present or not adaptable enough. And tried to remember what it felt like to look at herself without that math running in the background. It was harder than it should have been. Chisholm drove them to the event and parked 3 blocks away and walked in with her hand through Amara's arm, and Amara was aware of the low-level surveillance that was the permanent feature of being close to anything Ji-hwan touched. The black sedan she'd spotted twice in the last 2 weeks. The man who walked past Chisholm's cousin's building on a slightly too regular schedule. And she had made her peace with the fact that being seen tonight was a choice. She was choosing to be seen. She was choosing to exist in a public space. He could know she was alive and functional and present, and none of those things were things she was willing to conceal. The event was held in a gallery space just off the main Itaewon drag, 60 or 70 people. Music from a sound system tucked into the corner, food from a catering table that smelled like home in a way that pulled at something low in her chest. She took a glass of sparkling water and moved through the room and let herself breathe the specific kind of air that existed in a space where no one was performing anything for any criminal hierarchy. And the conversations happening around her were about art and architecture and the small dignities of diaspora life built in a country that remained ambivalent about its foreigners. She was standing at the edge of the room near a series of photographs mounted on the east wall when she heard someone say her name. She turned. Seo Tae-jun was standing 6 feet away in a plain gray jacket and no entourage, which meant either Ji-hwan didn't know he was here or he'd come on his own without clearance. And either option told her something she hadn't expected to learn tonight. He looked at her the way he always had, directly, without performance, and said, "I didn't know you'd be here." "I didn't know you'd be here either." A beat of silence. "Are you here for him?" she asked. "No." Simple. No hesitation. She studied him, Taejun was not a man given to unnecessary words, and she had learned across 3 years of proximity that his silences were reliable in a way that most men's speech was not. Then why? A friend organized the event. I come when I can. He paused. I know about the ring. I assumed. I argued with him that night. After. He didn't elaborate. He didn't offer consolation. He said it the way he said most things, as information delivered without decoration. I want you to know I said what I thought was true. I heard you, she said. I was in the foyer. Something crossed his face. Not surprise exactly, more like the confirmation of something he'd suspected. Then you heard all of it. Yes. He nodded. He looked at the photographs on the wall beside her for a moment without speaking. Are you all right? The question was so plainly asked that it landed differently than it would have from anyone else. Not performative concern, not the preamble to something else. Just a question. No, she said, but I'm going to be. Yeah, Taejun said. I think you will. They stood side by side looking at the photographs for a moment, and then Chisholm materialized at Amara's shoulder with the specific territorial energy of a best friend who has been scanning the room for threats all evening and has now identified one she hasn't fully assessed yet. And Amara said, Chisholm, this is Seo Taejun. And Chisholm looked at him with the precise and comprehensive suspicion she reserved for anyone connected to the last 3 years of Amara's life. Taejun met her eyes without flinching. Ma'am, he said, with the particular Korean formality that came out even in English when he was being careful. Chisholm said, I know who you are. I know you do, he said. A beat. Chisholm looked at Amara. Amara gave her the smallest nod she could manage. The specific nod that meant, I know what I'm doing, please trust me. And Chisholm inhaled through her nose and stepped back and positioned herself at the near edge of the conversation at a distance that communicated she was present and paying attention and had no intention of going far. Walk with me? Taejun asked Amara. She looked at him for a moment, then, yes. They moved toward this gallery's small outdoor space, a narrow terrace that opened onto the street, strung with low lights. The noise of Seoul's Thursday night rolling in from the main road. The air was cold in the way Seoul November was always cold, direct and without ceremony. And Amara wrapped her arms around herself and looked out at the neon and the traffic and the particular density of a city that had been absorbing people's stories for centuries without noticing any of them. He's looking for you, Taejun said. I know. He deployed the whole network, every district contact, every surveillance feed. He paused. He hasn't found you. I know that too. He's not going to stop. She turned to look at him. Why are you telling me this? Because you should know what you're dealing with. He looked at the street. He's not acting from strategy right now. He's acting from a pause, the specific kind Taejun produced when he was choosing precision over convenience. Something that might be regret. But with Ji Hwan, it's difficult to distinguish from wounded pride. Both look the same from the outside. Both produce the same behavior. He said he would rather die than marry me. Yes, not to hurt me. He said it to explain a decision he'd already made, like I was a quarterly report and he was explaining why the numbers hadn't been updated. Taejun didn't answer. There was nothing to argue with in that. Did you know? She asked. Before that night. Did you know about the Choi arrangement? He was quiet for a moment. I knew it was being discussed. I didn't know he'd characterized you the way he did in that room. But you knew he wasn't going to. I hoped I was wrong. He looked at her directly. I was not wrong. The cold moved between them and the city made its noise, and Amara looked at Seo Taejun and thought about what it meant that this was the person who'd said stop in a room full of powerful men who were dividing up her life like a budget item. She thought about what it cost a man like Taejun to say it at all, a man whose position depended on Ji Hwan's trust, whose entire professional existence was built on the loyalty that kept the Black Serpent intact. Why did you say it? She asked. In that room. He was quiet for long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. Because, he said finally, someone should have. Somewhere below them in the street, a car horn sounded and then faded, and the neon of Itaewon swam in the cold November dark, and Amara felt something she hadn't felt in 3 weeks, which was the possibility that the world outside Kang Ji Hwan's orbit was not empty, that it had people in it, that it had this conversation on this terrace with the honest, cold air, and a man who spoke plainly, and a best friend stationed 6 feet away ready to intervene if needed. "I should get back inside," she said. "Yeah." She turned to go. "Amara." She stopped. "I'd like to talk again. If you're open to it. Not on his behalf. Not about him. Just—" A pause, and something in his voice shifted register the way it did when he was being careful about something true. "I'd like to know how you're doing, when you're ready." She thought about it for exactly as long as it deserved. "I'll think about it," she said. She went inside. Chisholm materialized immediately. "Well?" "He's not here for Ji-hwan." Chisholm looked over her shoulder at the terrace. "You sure about that?" Amara followed her gaze. Tae-jun was still standing where she'd left him, looking out at the street, his hands in his jacket pockets and his broad back to the room. "No," Amara admitted, "but I think I believe him." Chisholm said, which was the noise she made when she was reserving judgment but not dismissing the premise. They stayed another hour. Amara ate something from the catering table that tasted like her mother's kitchen and talked to 3 people she hadn't met before about the architectural trade and the particular challenges of structural design in a country with seismic activity, and she felt herself inhabit the conversation with a fullness she hadn't realized she'd been missing. When they left, she noticed that Tae-jun was already gone. She also noticed that the black sedan she'd been tracking for 2 weeks was parked 100 meters down the street from the gallery, which meant by midnight, Ji-hwan would know she was in Itaewon, which meant the next move was his. She got in Chisholm's car and told herself she was ready for whatever that looked like. She was not entirely sure that was true, but she was surer of it than she'd been 3 weeks ago when she'd stood in a marble foyer holding dinner that was never going to be eaten and heard the man she loved explain, in a calm and reasonable voice, exactly what she was worth to him. The city rolled past the windows. Somewhere across Seoul, on the 42nd floor of a building that didn't officially exist, a platinum ring sat on a desk in the dark. And somewhere in the hours between that terrace and the morning, Kang Ji-hwan received the report that confirmed Amar's location, and that Seo Tae-jun had also been at the event. The report also confirmed by the gallery's exterior cameras that Amara and Tae-jun had stood together on the terrace for 17 minutes. Ji-hwan read the report twice. Then he put it down, very carefully, and picked up his phone, and called Min Sok-hyun, and said in a voice that gave nothing away, "Schedule a meeting with Tae-jun, tomorrow morning, my office." And then he sat alone in the dark of the penthouse that had been warm exactly once in 3 years, when she used to walk through the door, and waited for morning the same way he waited for everything, without blinking. The meeting was set for 9 in the morning, and Tae-jun arrived at 8:58, which was what he always did, and stood in the outer corridor of Ji-hwan's operational office on the 38th floor, 2 floors below the penthouse, where the actual machinery of the Black Serpent ran, and waited for the door to open without checking his phone and without speaking to the 2 men standing post on either side of the entrance. He had known Ji-hwan for 23 years. He knew what the request for a morning meeting after a night like that one meant. He had known it was coming before he'd even left the Itaewon Gallery. He had stayed on that terrace for 17 minutes with Amara Okoye, and he had been aware, with the precise peripheral intelligence that 20 years in organized crime develops in a person whether they want it or not, that there were cameras on the street below, and that by midnight a report would be sitting on Ji-hwan's desk. He had stayed anyway. The door opened. Ji-hwan was behind his desk. He was in a dark suit, no tie, and he looked the way he always looked at 8:58 in the morning, which was like a man who had not slept but was not going to acknowledge that. The surface of his desk was clear except for a single folder and a glass of water. The platinum ring was gone. Tae-jun noted its absence without remarking on it and took the chair across from the desk without being invited to sit, because he had been sitting in that chair for 15 years without being invited, and Ji-hwan had never once told him to wait for permission. The door closed behind him. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Ji-hwan opened the folder. He turned it so it faced Tae-jun across the desk. It was a printed still from the gallery's exterior camera. The terrace, low light, Amara and Tae-jun side by side, looking out at Itaewon's Thursday night traffic. Tae-jun looked at it. Then he looked at Ji-hwan. "You want to ask me something," Tae-jun said. "I want you to explain what you were doing there. A friend organized the event. I attend when I can. I've been going for 2 years. He paused. You can verify that. I already did. Jihuan's voice was controlled, surgical. You've attended 4 previous events at that venue. None of them produced a 17-minute conversation on a terrace. None of the previous events had her at them. The word her landed in the room and sat there. Jihuan looked at him for a long time. What did you talk about? I told her you were looking for her. I told her what the network had been doing for 3 weeks. A pause. I thought she deserved to know what she was navigating. You told her... Jihuan stopped. His jaw moved once. You told her operational intelligence about our search parameters. I told a civilian woman that the man who'd just decided not to marry her had deployed a criminal syndicate to locate her. I don't consider that operational intelligence. I consider that basic human decency. Silence. Jihuan stood up. He walked to the window that looked south over the Han River and put his hands in his pockets and was quiet for long enough that the river outside had time to shift color as a cloud passed over it. You've been in love with her, he said. Not a question. Taejun didn't move. That's not what this is about. Answer the question. A long beat. That question doesn't belong in this conversation. Jihuan turned from the window. His eyes were steady and dark and carried the specific quality that had ended several promising careers and at least 2 lives across the last decade. It became part of this conversation the moment you spent 17 minutes on that terrace. Then let me be clear about what those 17 minutes were. Taejun's voice didn't change register, didn't rise, didn't sharpen. It stayed exactly where it always was, low and direct and without apology. I asked her if she was all right. She told me she wasn't, but she was going to be. I told her you were still searching. She already knew. We looked at Seoul for a while, and I told her I'd like to talk again sometime, not because of you and not about you. And then she went back inside. That's the 17 minutes. Jihuan stared at him. And the part where you told her what you said in the room that night, Jihuan said quietly. I told her I argued with you. I didn't give her specifics. She already had the specifics. She was in the foyer. I know. So you already knew she'd heard everything before you had the conversation? Yes. And you still... Jihuan stopped again. He pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of his nose and breathed in through his nose, slow and deliberate. And Taejun recognized it as the thing Jihuan did when he was managing something that threatened to move faster than his control. You still approached her. I didn't approach her. We were in the same room. She turned around. Taejun. Jihuan. He met his eyes without blinking. You told a room full of your captains that you would rather die than marry her. You said it without hesitation and without shame and with the specific casualness of a man describing a business asset he's planning to retire. She was standing 40 feet away. She heard every syllable. And now you're sitting behind this desk acting like the problem is that I asked her how she was doing. The room was very quiet. Jihuan said, Don't do that. Do what? Make yourself the moral center of this conversation. You've known her for 3 years. You've been in this organization for 20. You know what lines exist. I know, Taejun said, that some lines exist for good reasons and some exist because powerful men find them convenient. You drew a line around her when she was yours. You stepped over her when she inconvenienced your political ambitions. The line moved the moment you needed it to. Jihuan crossed the room so fast Taejun barely had time to register the movement before Jihuan's hand came down flat on the desk between them, hard enough that the glass of water jumped and sloshed over its rim. They were 6 inches apart. Jihuan's breathing was audible for the first time in the conversation. Taejun didn't lean back. You're the only person in this organization, Jihuan said, in a voice that had gone very quiet and very precise, who I have never once made afraid of me. I need you to understand that I am considering revising that. Taejun looked at him. At the man he had walked beside for 23 years, through every expansion and every war and every night that had required both of them to make decisions they would carry in their bodies forever. He looked at the controlled fury in Jihuan's face, and underneath it, much deeper, something that was not fury at all. You're not angry at me, Taejun said quietly. You're angry because she's gone and you can't find her, and nothing you have built in 20 years gives you any leverage over a woman who decided to disappear. Ji Huan straightened up. He stepped back. He picked up the folder and closed it. "Get out of my office," he said. Taejun stood. He buttoned his jacket. He walked to the door and had his hand on the handle when Ji Huan spoke again. "Stay away from her." Taejun paused with his hand on the handle. "That's a request," Ji Huan said. "Not an order. I'm giving you the courtesy of the distinction." Taejun thought about 17 minutes on a terrace and a woman in a green dress who'd said, "I'll think about it," and meant it. He thought about the gallery photographs on the east wall and the sound of Soul at night and the way she had said, "I heard you," not as an accusation, not as relief, but as information that had weight and significance and was still being processed. He opened the door. "I'll take it under consideration," he said. He walked out. The week that followed was the kind of quiet that precedes structural failure. Taejun carried out his work without deviation. Territorial meetings, financial reviews, the ongoing negotiation with a logistics partner in Incheon who was skimming margins in a way that would need to be addressed before the year end. He did his job completely. He answered Ji Huan's operational messages within minutes. He attended the Tuesday briefing and said the things that needed saying and noted that Ji Huan looked at him across the conference table with a quality of attention that was different from usual. Not hostile exactly, but calibrated. Measuring. On Wednesday, Amara texted him. A number he didn't have saved, which meant she'd gotten his through a channel he'd have to think about later. The message was brief. "Coffee. Neutral ground. If you're still open to talking." He stared at the message for 30 seconds. He typed, "Thursday, noon. Tell me where." She sent an address in Hongdae. A small place, not a chain, the kind of cafe that had 6 tables and handwritten menus, and enough ambient noise to make a conversation private without trying. He recognized the choice. She had thought about it. He went. She was already there when he arrived, at a table near the back wall with her hands wrapped around a ceramic mug and her coat still on, and she looked like someone who was managing the deliberate project of becoming herself again. The green dress was gone, replaced by something darker and simpler, and her hair was down and she wore no makeup, and there were shadows under her eyes that weren't there 3 weeks ago. She looked, he thought, like a person who was sleeping badly and not eating enough and still choosing to show up to things anyway. He sat down. A server came and he ordered without looking at the menu. "You came," she said. "I said I would." "You also said you'd take the other thing under consideration." He looked at her. "He told you about the meeting. He didn't have to." A small pause. "I know how he operates. I spent 3 years watching him manage people. He would have called you in the next morning. He would have asked about the terrace, and he would have told you to stay away from me, because that's what he does when something moves outside his control. He issues parameters." Taejun said nothing. "Did he order you not to come today?" "He asked me to stay away from you." A beat. "As a request, not an order. He gave me the distinction." She absorbed this. "And you're here anyway?" "Yes." She looked down at her mug. Her finger traced the rim of it once, and then she pulled her hand back and put it flat on the table. "I need to ask you something directly." "Go ahead." "Do you have feelings for me?" He didn't look away. "Yes." She nodded. She took a breath. "How long?" "Since the first time Ji Huan introduced you to the inner circle. You were arguing with the structural engineer he'd hired for the Mapo property renovation. You told him his load calculations were wrong, and then you pulled out your laptop and showed him exactly how they were wrong, and he had to go recalculate in the hallway." A pause. "Ji Huan thought it was funny. I thought—" He stopped. "I thought you were the most alive person I'd ever seen in that building." Amara was quiet for a moment. The cafe moved around them. Somewhere near the front, 2 university students were arguing about something that had nothing to do with criminal organizations or heartbreak or the specific weight of loving someone who had already decided what you were worth. "Did he know?" she asked. "No, I made sure of that." "Why?" "Because you were his, and because—" He paused. "I am not a man who takes things that belong to someone I love." The word love had come out in a way that referred to both of them, to Ji Huan and to Amara, and they both understood it and neither of them addressed it directly. She said, "I'm not ready for anything. I need you to know that. I'm still in the middle of trying to figure out who I am outside of the last 3 years. I don't know what I want yet. I'm not sure I'm capable of knowing right now. I'm not asking you for anything. I know, but I needed to say it. She looked at him. I don't want to be the thing between you and Ji-hwan. I'm not willing to be that. You're not between us, Taejun said. He put himself between us the night he described you as not a factor. She flinched. Small. She hadn't known he'd been told those exact words. I'm sorry, so, he said. That was... No. She shook her head. Don't apologize for the truth. They drank their coffee. They talked about other things, her work, which she was slowly trying to rebuild independently of the firm she'd left when Ji-hwan's world had made her professional life complicated, and the specific challenge of starting over in a city that she had now been in for 4 years and still sometimes felt like a visitor in. He talked about Incheon and the logistics problem in neutral terms that gave nothing away about the organization's specifics. It was the most ordinary conversation he could remember having in years. He thought about that on the walk back to his car. He thought about what it said about the last 20 years, that a coffee with a woman who was trying to rebuild herself registered as extraordinary by contrast. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Ji-hwan. He stopped on the sidewalk outside the cafe and looked at the screen and then picked up. Min Seok-hyun tells me you were in Hongdae this afternoon, Ji-hwan said. Taejun closed his eyes briefly. Min Seok-hyun. Of course. He'd put a loose tail on Taejun after the gallery. He should have assumed. Yes, he said. With her. Yes. The pause was long. Taejun. Ji-hwan's voice was different from the morning meeting. The surgical precision was still there, but underneath it something had shifted, something that had cracks running through it. I asked you directly. You asked me to stay away. I considered it. He stood on the Hongdae sidewalk with the afternoon traffic moving around him. I didn't. Another pause. Do you understand what you're doing? Ji-hwan said. Do you understand what this looks like to the organization, to my captains? You are my right hand. You've been beside me for 20 years, and you are currently meeting a woman for coffee, Taejun said. A woman who is no longer in your life. A woman you decided had no future with you. A woman you described, in front of witnesses, as not a factor. She was mine. She was never yours. You made that clear. His voice was even. You made that very clear. He heard Ji-hwan breathe. I'm asking you one more time, Ji-hwan said, as the brother you and I decided to be to each other before either of us had anything worth protecting. I am asking you as that person. Walk away from this. Taejun looked back at the cafe. Through the window, he could see Amara still at the table, pulling on her coat, and she looked up once through the glass without seeing him, and he watched her face for just a moment. The careful way she was holding herself together, the deliberate project of each small movement. And he thought about 20 years of walking beside Ji-hwan, and what it had cost both of them, and what it had built, and what it had quietly, brick by brick, taken apart. I can't do that, he said. The line went dead. The Choi family meeting happened 5 days later, and Ji-hwan attended it and sat across from Choi Byum-seok in a private room at a restaurant in Cheongdam-dong that had been secured by both families' people, and he listened to the old man lay out the terms of the proposed alliance with the specific unhurried confidence of someone who believed time was on his side. Choi Yeon sat to her father's left and said almost nothing for the first hour, which Ji-hwan recognized as trained strategy rather than deference. She was reading the room the same way he was, cataloging, filing, preparing. She was sharp. He could see it in the way her eyes moved. He thought about Amara in the penthouse the first time he'd brought her there. How she'd walked through the space like she was assessing load-bearing walls, hands not touching anything, head tilted slightly, the quiet competence of someone who understood structures. He had found it attractive in the way that he found competence in general attractive. He hadn't thought much about what it meant that she brought that quality into every room she entered, and he'd spent 3 years treating it as background noise. He told Choi Byum-seok he would need time to consider the proposal. Choi Byum-seok smiled the smile of a man who expected that answer and was not discouraged by it. Ji-hwan returned to the penthouse that evening and sat at his desk and pulled up the surveillance logs that Min Seok-hyun had been compiling. Amara and Taejun had met 3 times in 5 days. coffee in Hongdae. A walk along the Cheon stream, 47 minutes, no apparent destination. A bookshop in Insadong where they'd been for over an hour and where the interior cameras couldn't reach. He read the logs twice. He was not a man who experienced jealousy in any recognizable form. He had always been too controlled for that particular loss of self. What he felt looking at these reports was something more structural, like watching a building he'd designed develop a crack that was moving in a direction he hadn't engineered and couldn't stop without tearing open the wall. He had built 20 years of something with Taejun. He had trusted him with things he trusted no one else with. Not strategic intelligence, not the specifics of how the Black Serpent maintained its position, but the quieter things that cost more to give. He had been honest with Taejun about fear twice in his adult life. He had called him at 3 a.m. once when a decision had gone wrong in a way that cost lives and found him on the other end of the phone saying nothing, just present the way Taejun was present, completely, without condition. And Taejun was walking along the Cheonggyecheon stream with the woman Ji-hwan had not chosen. He picked up his phone. He called Min So-kyun. "I need you to start a quiet conversation," he said, "with the senior captains. I need them to understand that Taejun's recent behavior represents a conflict of interest with the organization's leadership." A pause. "Boss." "Not an accusation, a conversation. I want them thinking about questions of loyalty before those questions become necessary to ask directly." Min So-kyun said, after a moment, "Understood." Ji-hwan hung up. He sat with what he had just set in motion. He was a precise man, and he knew precisely what he was doing. He was beginning the process of repositioning the narrative around Taejun inside the organization. It was subtle, and it was deliberate, and if done correctly, it would place Taejun under enough internal scrutiny that his ability to operate independently would be compromised. He told himself it was about the organization. He looked at the surveillance log, 47 minutes along the Cheonggyecheon. He told himself it was about protecting what he'd built. The city was dark outside the window. The desk was clean and clear, and in the center of it, where the platinum ring used to sit, there was nothing at all. Down in Hongdae, in the spare room at Chisholm's cousin's apartment, Amara Okoye was sitting at a small desk with her laptop open, working on a structural proposal for a residential project that had nothing to do with the Black Serpent Syndicate or the 42nd floor or 3 years of adjusting recipes and silences and ambitions to fit inside a space that had never been designed to hold her. She was working late. She was eating the food she wanted to eat. She was, quietly and without announcement, becoming someone who was harder to erase than she'd been 3 weeks ago. And in the 38th floor operational office of the Black Serpent Syndicate, a report was being drafted by Min Seok-hyun that would circulate among the senior captains by morning, and it would not accuse Seo Taejun of anything. It would simply ask, in careful and neutral language, whether his recent activities suggested that his priorities remained aligned with the organization's leadership. It was a small document. It would produce enormous damage. And Taejun, who had spent 20 years reading Ji-hwan's moves before they landed, who had been the first to see them coming in every confrontation the organization had survived, sat in his own apartment in Yongsan-gu that same night and looked at his phone and at the message he'd received from a junior captain he trusted. "Heads up, something moving through the senior level involves you." And understood, with the exhausted clarity of a man who has just watched a brother choose power over honesty for the last time, that the line had been crossed. Not by him, by Ji-hwan, who had just turned the machinery of the Black Serpent Syndicate, the same machinery they had built together across 2 decades, against the one person inside it who had ever told him the truth. Taejun set his phone down on the table. He sat with his hands flat on either side of it, and the specific stillness of a man who has reached the end of something and is standing in the exact moment before the next thing begins. And he thought about 20 years and about 47 minutes along a stream, and about a woman who said, "I'm not ready for anything," with the honesty of someone who had been promised the future and handed the bill instead. He picked up his phone. He opened a new message. He typed Amara's number. "There's something you need to know. Can we meet tomorrow?" 3 seconds passed. "Yes," she wrote back. "What's wrong?" He looked at the message for a moment. "Ji-hwan just declared war," he typed. "Not on an enemy, on me. And eventually he's going to use it to come for you too." The cursor blinked in the empty space below the sent message. Her reply took longer this time. Long enough that he set the phone down and looked at the ceiling of his apartment and listened to the city outside and thought about what it meant that he was here, in this moment, with this choice already made. His phone lit up. "Then we need to be ready," Amara had written. And somewhere across the city, in the machinery that Jihuan had just set turning, the first gear had caught the second, and the second would catch the third. And the thing that had been inevitable since the night a woman stood in a marble foyer holding dinner that went uneaten was finally, irrevocably, in motion. They met the next morning at a pojangmacha near the Yongsan train station that Tae-jun had used for years as a place to think. A canvas-covered street stall with 4 plastic stools and a gas burner, and an owner who had long ago learned not to remember faces. Amara arrived first, wrapped in a heavy coat, her hands around a paper cup of something hot, and when Tae-jun came through the canvas flap and sat across from her, she read his face immediately and felt the cold that was already in her chest drop another degree. He put his phone on the table between them, screen up, and showed her the message from the junior captain. She read it. She read it again. "How many people in the senior level?" she said. "Enough. Min Suk-hyun is running it, which means Ji-hwan is running it through him. It's not an accusation. It's a question being circulated, whether my priorities are still aligned with leadership." He picked up the phone and turned it face down. In the organization, a question like that is its own verdict. People don't wait for an answer. They make decisions based on the fact that the question was asked. What kind of decisions? They pull back. They stop routing information through me. They start going directly to Ji-hwan on things that would normally come to me first. Slowly, I become isolated from the operational picture. He was very calm saying this. She understood the calm was not detachment. It was the specific steadiness of a man who has run the scenario to its conclusion already and is now simply reporting what he found there. And once I'm isolated, I'm controllable. And once I'm controllable, he can do whatever he wants with the narrative. She set her cup down. "About you. About us." "About the timeline," Tae-jun said. She looked at him. If he controls the narrative inside the organization, he can establish whatever sequence of events serves him. He can say that I pursued you while you were still with him, that I created the distance between you two deliberately, that I was working to pull you away from him for my own reasons while pretending to serve the organization. He looked at her directly. None of that is true, but in the world he operates in, truth is secondary to the story that gets told first and told loudest. The pojangmacha owner set 2 bowls of something on the counter without being asked and moved to the far end of the stall and turned up the small television mounted in the corner. The sound of a morning news program filled the space. Amara stared at the bowl in front of her without seeing it. "He'd make me the reason," she said. "Yes. He'd make it look like you betrayed him. Over me. That's the shape of it." She was quiet. Then, "And me? What does my part look like in his version?" Tae-jun didn't answer immediately, which was its own answer. "Tell me," she said. "In his version," Tae-jun said carefully, "you were not a woman who heard the truth and made a decision. You were a woman who had already been making another decision. He'd suggest the timeline moved earlier, that what I told you on the terrace was not news to you because we had already been—" He stopped. "In contact," she said flatly. "Or more." She felt something move through her that was not quite anger yet. It was the thing that comes before anger, when the anger itself is too large to arrive all at once. She pressed her hands flat against the edge of the counter and felt the cold plastic under her palms. "He'd make me the one who was unfaithful," she said. "He'd take the story of what he did and he'd reverse it." "Yes. He told a room full of men he would rather die than marry me. He described me as a temporary asset with an expiration date, and his response to me leaving is to make me the one who betrayed the relationship." "Amara, I need a minute." She stood up from the stool and pushed through the canvas flap and stood outside on the Yongsan pavement with the morning traffic moving past and the cold November air hitting her face, and she breathed it in and stood there for a moment, letting the anger arrive at its proper size. It was considerable. She went back inside. She sat down. "What do we do?" she said. Tae-jun looked at her. Something in his face shifted. Not relief exactly, but the recognition of a decision being made in real time. "There's a junior captain named Baek Sung-woo. He's been with the organization for 8 years, and he reports to me directly, and I trust him within specific parameters. He's the one who sent me the warning last night. He can tell us how far the conversation has moved. That's information. What do we do with it? Right now, nothing. We understand the scope before we move. If we respond before we know how many of the senior captains have been reached, we respond blind. He picked up his phone. I'm going to meet Bake this afternoon. Alone. You need to stay out of public spaces that the network watches. I've been doing that. Do it more. She nodded. She looked at the bowl of food she still hadn't touched. Taejun, if this gets worse, she paused. If he escalates past the organization and starts putting this into wider circulation, Seoul's social layer, the business families, the political connections he maintains, he won't do that yet. Going public implicates him. The Choi Alliance negotiation is still live. He needs to look stable. Yet, she said. Yet, he agreed. They finished the meal she didn't eat, and he ate without tasting, and they left separately, 2 minutes apart, and Amara walked back to Chisom's cousin's apartment through side streets that she had memorized over the last 3 weeks, the way she memorized building plans. Every exit, every angle, every place where the sightline was compromised. Chisom listened to all of it without interrupting. When Amara finished, Chisom stood up from the kitchen table and went to the window and looked out at the street below for a moment, then turned around. He's going to bury you, Chisom said. That's what you're telling me. He's going to try. Amara, you've been in Seoul for 4 years. You don't have family here. Your professional network was compromised the moment you got involved with him because half the people at that firm knew who he was and made their own calculations. The people in his world who might have spoken for you, they're going to follow whoever looks like they're winning. She came back to the table and sat down and looked at her directly. He has resources. He has reach. He has 20 years of relationships in every layer of this city. What do you have? Amara met her eyes. You. I mean that seriously. So do I. She paused. And I have the truth. I have what actually happened. The sequence, the timing, and I have... She stopped. She thought about something, a specific something. She turned it over carefully, the way she turned structural problems over, looking at the load and the joints and the points most likely to fail under pressure. What? Chisom said. The night I left, Amara said slowly. I called you from the elevator. Do you remember? Chisom went very still. I called you at 11:53, Amara said. I told you what I'd heard, word for word. I was still in the car. She looked at Chisom. You were recording it. Chisom looked at her for a long time. Amara, you record every call after 10 at night. You've done it since that thing with your ex in Lagos. You told me about it years ago. You said you learned to document everything because you never knew which conversation was going to matter later. She leaned forward. Chisom, did you record that call? Chisom stood up again. She went to her bedroom. She came back with her phone and sat down and opened the audio file manager she used and scrolled. Her face was very still. She turned the phone to face Amara. The file timestamp read 23:53:07. Duration, 14 minutes, 22 seconds. Amara stared at it. I didn't think about it afterward, Chisom said quietly. I didn't think it was... I archived everything automatically. I hadn't even gone back to, play it, Amara said. Chisom pressed play. The audio was imperfect. Car noise, her own breathing, the sound of Seoul at night. But her voice was clear. Clear and steady, in a way she didn't remember being, but apparently had been, because she had been in shock, and shock in her particular body produced a strange and temporary precision. She heard herself say, he said, I want to get this right because I want to remember it exactly. He said he'd rather die than marry her. He said it without hesitating. He said Amara is beautiful and loyal and has been good for now, but she's not the foundation of what I'm building. Those were the exact words, not the foundation. Chisom's voice on the recording, careful. When did he say this? Just now, 20 minutes ago. I was in the foyer. I didn't knock. I could hear everything through the partition. There were at least 4 people in the room. The recording continued. Amara listened to her own voice describe the rest of it. Taejun's question, Ji-hwan's response, the ring, the plan to return before dawn, the specific and terrible clarity of a decision made in an elevator going down. When it ended, both women sat in the kitchen of the cousin's apartment in Yongsan-gu, and the morning light came through the window, and neither of them spoke for a moment. "That's dated," Amara said. "Time-stamped. The night itself, before anything else happened, before Taejun, before the gallery, before any of it." "Yes. It proves I wasn't planning anything. It proves the timeline. It proves what I heard, and when I heard it, and that I made my decision that night, alone, based on what he said." Chisholm looked at the phone. "If you release this, I know." "Amara, this is audio of him, in his own building, describing the woman he was publicly with as a temporary convenience in front of his operational staff. If this gets out, I know what it does to him. It doesn't just damage him personally. It damages the alliance negotiation. It makes him look weak in front of every family he works with. It gives every rival a story to use." Chisholm's voice was careful, not discouraging, processing. "You'd be releasing a weapon inside the criminal organization of a man who has already decided to come for you." "He's already coming for me," Amara said. "He's already reversing the timeline. He's already making me the one who did something wrong." She stood up. She walked to the window and looked down at the same street Chisholm had looked at, and she thought about 3 years of adjustments and a recipe she made wrong on purpose, and a textile moved to the guest room without explanation. She thought about being not a factor. She thought about Taejun's face this morning and the precise, patient calm of a man watching the machinery turn toward him. "He's going to destroy what I have left of my reputation in this city. He's going to make sure every door that might open for me professionally stays closed, because any connection to me becomes a connection to the woman who betrayed Kang Ji-hwan. And he's going to do it quietly and thoroughly, and by the time anyone questions the narrative, it'll already be set." "Wambum, mams bichimit." She turned from the window. "I need to think about whether to use it," she said. "But I need you to make copies, secure copies, 3 of them, minimum, different locations." Chisholm looked at her. "Okay. Don't tell Taejun yet." "Why?" "Because if he knows about it, he becomes responsible for it. And right now his situation inside the organization is precarious enough without adding this. If Ji-hwan finds out Taejun knew about this recording," she paused, "it becomes proof of coordination. It becomes proof of the story Ji-hwan is already building." Chisholm nodded slowly. "You're thinking like him. I know." The admission tasted like something she didn't want in her mouth. "I spent 3 years watching how he manages information. I didn't plan to need it. The 3 days that followed were the quietest and the most dangerous." Taejun met with Baek Sung-woo on Tuesday and came back with a picture that was worse than he'd described to Amara. The questions circulating through the senior captains had not stayed neutral for long. It had picked up weight as it moved, the way rumors in closed systems always did, accumulating interpretation and inference until the original careful language bore almost no relationship to what was actually being said in the lower tiers of the organization. What the junior captains were hearing was not a question about Taejun's priorities. What they were hearing was that Taejun had been sleeping with the boss's woman while still under the boss's roof. Taejun sat in his apartment with that information and felt something go very cold and very methodical in his chest. He called Baek back and asked him to be specific about the sourcing. Baek said it was coming from 2 separate district bosses who both reported to Min Seok-hyun, which meant it was an inference. Somebody had given them a specific version of the timeline and told them to pass it down. He thought about telling Amara. He decided she didn't need the specific shape of the lie yet. She needed to be safe. He called her and told her to stay inside for the next 48 hours, that the situation had developed, that he was handling the organizational piece. She said, "How bad?" He said, "Manageable." He was not certain that was true. On Thursday morning, Ji-hwan called a senior captain meeting. Taejun received the notification through the standard channel, which meant he was still officially included in leadership communications, which meant the move hadn't been made public yet. Ji-hwan was still maneuvering in the space before the formal break, where everything was deniable. Taejun went. He sat in the conference room on the 38th floor with 6 other men and Ji-hwan at the head of the table. And Ji-hwan ran through operational business for 40 minutes with the complete normalcy of a man who had not spent the last 2 weeks systematically undermining the person sitting to his left. He was precise and organized and gave nothing away, and the meeting moved through its agenda items without incident. At the end, as the captains began to stand, Ji-hwan said, One more thing. Everyone sat back down. Ji Huan did not look at Tae-jun. I want to address a situation that has been discussed informally in recent days, he said. He spoke to the room, steady, measured, the voice of a man delivering organizational clarity rather than personal accusation. There have been questions about certain relationships and certain loyalties. I want to be clear that I do not intend to allow personal complications to destabilize the organization's structure. A pause. But I also want to be transparent with senior leadership that a situation exists in which I have personal investment and that I am managing it as cleanly as I can given the circumstances. Min Seo-kyun said, "We appreciate that, boss." Dong-chul said nothing and looked at the table. One of the district bosses, a man named Ryu, who had been with the organization for 16 years, looked at Tae-jun once, briefly, and then looked away. Tae-jun sat completely still and felt the room calibrate around him and said nothing. Ji Huan looked at him then, for the first time in the meeting, direct. "Tae-jun," he said, "is there anything you'd like to add?" The room was very quiet. Every man in it had spent years learning to read the specific frequencies of what was said and not said in this room. They were all reading now. Tae-jun looked at Ji Huan. He looked at the man he had walked beside for 23 years, and he thought about what it meant that they had come to this room in this moment in this specific and terrible sentence. "Is there anything you'd like to add?" Which was not a question at all, but a test in front of witnesses. A test designed to produce either a submission or a declaration. "No," Tae-jun said. Ji Huan held his gaze for a moment. "Then we're done," Ji Huan said. "Thank you all." The captains filed out. Tae-jun was the last to stand. He buttoned his jacket and walked to the door and had almost reached it when Ji Huan said quietly, so that only Tae-jun could hear, "I gave you every chance." Tae-jun stopped walking. He didn't turn around. "You gave me every chance to do what?" he said. "To choose correctly." He stood with his hand 3 inches from the door handle and the weight of 23 years pressing between his shoulder blades, and he thought about what choosing correctly had looked like from Ji Huan's position, staying silent in a room of captains while a woman was reduced to a political calculation, accepting the order to stay away, allowing the manufactured timeline to move through the organization unchallenged, letting Ji Huan build whatever story served him best. "I did choose correctly," Tae-jun said. He opened the door and walked out. He went directly to the parking structure and sat in his car for 4 minutes without starting it. And he thought about the room, and about Ryu's single careful glance, and about Dong-chul's eyes on the table, and about Min Seo-kyun's immediate and practiced response to Ji Huan's speech. And he thought about how many of the 6 men in that room were still genuinely undecided, versus how many had already made their calculation, and were simply waiting to see which side produced the better outcome before they committed. He started the car. His phone rang as he was pulling out of the structure. A number he didn't recognize. He picked up. A woman's voice. Korean, professional, the clipped precision of someone accustomed to delivering information on behalf of someone else. "Mr. Seo, I'm calling on behalf of the Choi family. Mr. Choi Beom-seok would like to arrange a private meeting at your earliest convenience. He suggests it would be of mutual interest." Tae-jun's hands were still on the wheel. "The Choi family," he said. "Yes, sir." He thought about Choi Beom-seok, who was 71 years old and had been running the Eastern District Alliance for 30 years, and who had a daughter trained to inherit, and who had just watched, through whatever network of information a man like that maintained, the Black Serpent's internal cohesion develop a fault line. Old Choi was opportunistic. Old Choi was also, in Tae-jun's 20 years of experience, never early. He only moved when he had already determined the outcome, which meant he had already determined something. "Tell him," Tae-jun said carefully, "that I'll be in touch." He hung up. He drove. He was 3 blocks from his apartment when his phone buzzed again. Amara, a text message, and the content of it made him pull the car over to the curb immediately. "Chisholm just showed me something. We need to talk right now, not on the phone." He typed, "On my way." He sat for 1 second with the phone in his hand and the engine running and Seoul moving around him in every direction, and thought about the Choi family's call in the conference room and Ji Hwan's voice saying, "I gave you every chance," and the particular sensation of a situation that has been deteriorating in increments and has now, in the space of a single morning, begun to move at a different speed entirely. He pulled back into traffic. Across the city, in the penthouse on the 42nd floor, Kang Ji-hwan was standing at his window with his phone in his hand reading a message from Min Seok-hyun that said simply, "Choi's office made contact with Seo this morning. Unknown content." Ji-hwan read the message twice. His jaw tightened once, barely perceptibly, and then his face returned to its controlled surface, and he set the phone down and looked at the city and understood that the situation had just moved past the point where it could be managed through the organization's internal channels. He picked his phone back up. He called a number he used rarely, a contact who operated in the specific layer between Seoul's criminal architecture and its social elite, journalists, commentators, the unofficial channels through which reputations were built, and he picked the phone back up and called a number he used rarely, a contact who operated in the specific layer between Seoul's criminal architecture and its social elite, a man named Hwang who ran a private communications consultancy and whose actual business was the management of narratives for people who could not afford public ones. Ji-hwan had used him twice in 15 years. Both times the problem had been resolved before it required any further action. "I need something distributed," Ji-hwan said when Hwang picked up. "Not widely, targeted, the social layer, the families, the business connections, the circles that intersect with my organization's partners. Content? A timeline, specific dates, the implication that a personal betrayal in my household predated the separation." A pause. "I don't need accusations. I need questions. Let the questions do the work." Hwang said, "I can have something moving by Monday." "Tomorrow," Ji-hwan said. A brief silence. "That's aggressive." "Yes," Ji-hwan said. "It is." He hung up. Outside the window, Seoul was moving toward evening, the towers of Gangnam beginning their slow transition from gray steel to lit glass, and Ji-hwan stood at the window and felt nothing in particular about what he had just set in motion except the specific and familiar sensation of a decision made cleanly and without ambiguity. He had spent 20 years making decisions in that register. He was good at it. The fact that this particular decision involved Amara and Tae-jun rather than territorial rivals or competing organizations did not change the mechanics. A threat to his position was a threat to his position. You identified it, you isolated it, you neutralized it before it could compound. He told himself that. He looked at the city. He told himself that again. But Amara was standing in the center of Chisom's cousin's kitchen with her phone in her hand and the audio file open on the screen when Tae-jun arrived. He came through the door and read the room in 2 seconds. Chisom, at the kitchen table with her arms crossed, and the expression of someone who has made peace with a decision she doesn't entirely endorse. And Amara standing very still with the specific quality of a person who has been still for too long and is about to stop being still. "What happened?" he said. Amara turned the phone and showed him the timestamp. The 14 minutes. The date. He looked at it, then he looked at her. "You called Chisom from the elevator." "The night I left, 11:53. She records her calls automatically. She had it archived and didn't think about it until I asked." Tae-jun sat down at the table. He put his hands flat on its surface and looked at the phone and didn't speak for a moment, and Amara watched him process it the way he processed everything, thoroughly, without visible emotion, turning each implication over before moving to the next. "This proves the timeline," he said. "Yes. Before the gallery, before the terrace, before any contact between you and me." "Yes." He looked up. "He's already moving something through Hwang." Both women looked at him. "I don't have confirmation yet," he said. "But Choi's office called me this morning. Old Choi doesn't make contact like that without a reason, and the only reason that makes sense is that he's heard something that interests him, which means something is already circulating in the upper layer." He paused. "If Hwang is distributing a timeline story and it reaches the Choi family before we respond, then the version that lands first is the version that sticks," Amara said. "Yes," Chisom said. "So we release the recording." Tae-jun looked at Amara. Amara looked at the phone in her hand. 14 minutes and 22 seconds. Her own voice, raw and steady, describing a man she had loved for 3 years in the specific terms that the man himself had established. Not a factor, not the foundation, Temporary. If I release this, she said, it's not a defensive move anymore. It's a strike. Yes, Taejun said. It will damage him. Not just personally. The alliance negotiation, the organization's stability, the political relationships he maintains, yes. People could get hurt who have nothing to do with this. Taejun was quiet for a moment. Some of them. The political connections will distance themselves, which is disruption rather than damage. The Choi alliance may collapse, which affects the Eastern District operations but doesn't destabilize the core structure. He met her eyes. Ji-hwan will survive it. He's survived worse, but he will not survive it without cost, and he knows that, which is why he's moving first. Amara set the phone on the table. He threatened my reputation, she said. It was not a question. He's building the infrastructure to do it, Taejun said. By Monday it will be in circulation. Then we go tonight, Amara said. Checked. Chisholm had a contact, a woman named Park Ji-young, who ran a private legal and media advisory practice in Sinchon, and who had represented several high-profile individuals in matters requiring discretion in both directions. She was not cheap, and she was not warm, but she was, by Chisholm's accounting, completely reliable. Chisholm called her at 6:15 and explained the situation in the compressed, factual language of someone who had once studied law before switching to design and still thought in its categories. Park Ji-young listened without interrupting, and at the end said she could see them at 8. They drove to Sinchon in Chisholm's car. Taejun followed in his own vehicle because arriving together produced a specific image, and the image mattered now. Amara sat in the passenger seat and watched the city move past the windows, and thought about Ji-hwan standing at a window somewhere above all of this, doing the same calculation she was doing now from the opposite side of it, and felt something that was not quite hatred and not quite grief but occupied the space between them. A dense and exhausting knowledge of what a person was capable of when they had decided the most important thing was to remain unhurt. Park Ji-young's office was on the 4th floor of a building that looked entirely ordinary from the street, and was entirely ordinary, which was the point. She was 52 years old, with short hair and reading glasses she didn't need to push up her nose while she read, and she read the situation summary Chisholm had prepared in the car in under 3 minutes, and then set it down and looked at Amara. "The recording is clean?" she said. "Automatic capture, unedited, time-stamped by the carrier," Chisholm said. "Who else has access to it currently?" "The 3 of us." "Has it been duplicated?" 3 secure copies. Separate locations. Park Ji-young looked at Tae-jun. "Your position inside the organization." "Compromised," he said. "Actively." "If this recording is released and the organization determines you were involved in the release decision, what does that produce for you?" "A significant problem," he said without inflection. "Define significant. The kind that requires me to no longer be inside the organization when it happens." Park Ji-young looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at Amara. "You understand that releasing this removes your primary protection, which is your invisibility. Right now, you're a private individual who has removed herself from a difficult situation. The moment this recording becomes public, you become a public actor in a conflict with a man who commands significant resources." "I'm already a public actor," Amara said. "He's making sure of that. I'm just not the one writing the story yet." Park Ji-young took off her glasses and set them on her desk. "All right, here's what I can do. I have contacts at 2 independent media outlets that operate outside the entertainment cycle. They cover the intersection of business and criminal influence without naming names unless the evidence requires it. I can have the audio authenticated by a third party by morning. I can have a distribution strategy prepared that releases the recording simultaneously to 5 separate channels, which means it cannot be suppressed by any single point of intervention." She looked between them. "Once I start that process, it runs. There's no pulling it back." "I know," Amara said. "I need you to be certain." Amara looked at the desk between them and thought about certainty. What it felt like, where it lived in the body, whether what she was feeling right now qualified. It was not confidence exactly. It was the specific and uncomfortable clarity of a person who has run the available options and found that only one of them leaves her standing at the end. "Do it," she said. Park Ji-young put her glasses back on and reached for her phone. Jim. It broke at 6:47 the following morning. Amara was awake when it happened. She hadn't slept, had spent the night sitting at the small desk in the spare room with her laptop open and her phone face up, and the particular vigil-like quality of someone waiting for something they've set in motion to arrive. Chisholm had fallen asleep on the couch at 3, and Taejun had gone back to his apartment at midnight after confirming the authentication had come through clean and the distribution was queued. The first notification came from a financial news aggregator. Then 2 minutes later, a business intelligence brief that circulated among Seoul's corporate and elite social layer. Then the independent outlets Park Ji-young had seeded. Then, 11 minutes after the first notification, a mainstream news alert. Amara's phone lit up like something alive. She didn't look at the notifications. She looked at the wall of the spare room and breathed in and out and listened to the city begin to understand what it was hearing. Her voice. On a recording. November night. Elevator. The words she had said into the phone to her best friend while she was still shaking from the foyer of a penthouse on the 42nd floor. And underneath the audio, authenticated and timestamped, the specific and irrefutable content of what Kang Ji-hwan had said to his captains about the woman he had spent 3 years with. She's not the foundation of what I'm building. She never was. I'd rather die than marry her. The city heard it. Betty? Ji-hwan's phone woke him at 6:51. Min Seok-hyun. He picked up on the second ring because Min Seok-hyun did not call before 7 unless the situation required it. It's out, Min Seok-hyun said. Audio recording, multiple distribution points simultaneously. Authentication certificate from a third party attached to every release. Ji-hwan sat up. Content, he said. The night she left. Her voice, calling her friend from your elevator. She's describing what she heard through the partition, word for word. A pause. Boss, it's clean. There's no ambiguity about the date or the context or... I know what it is, Ji-hwan said. He stood up. He walked to the window. The city was just beginning to develop its morning color, the sky over the Han gray and pale, the towers still carrying the remnants of their overnight light. His phone was buzzing continuously in his other hand. He did not look at it. Huang, he said, already called me. He says the distribution hit too many points simultaneously for any suppression to be effective. It's already been picked up by 3 overseas outlets covering Korean business news. Min Seok-hyun's voice was careful in the specific way of a man delivering information he knows will produce consequences he can't control. The Choi family's office called 40 minutes ago. Byom Seok is requesting a postponement of the alliance discussions pending clarification of the organization's current leadership stability. The Choi family. Ji-hwan put his phone face down on the windowsill and pressed both hands flat against the cold glass and looked at the city and let the full weight of what had happened arrive without managing it for a moment, which was something he almost never allowed himself. She had the recording. She had it from the night itself. Before anything between her and Taejun, before the gallery, before the stream, before the bookshop. She had documented his words in real time without knowing she was doing it, and she had held that document for weeks while he deployed his entire network to find her, and while he built a false timeline through his captains, and while he called Huang to distribute a story designed to make her the one who had done something wrong. She had held it, and she had released it at the exact moment it would produce the maximum damage. His phone lit up face down on the windowsill. He could see the glow of it through the glass surface. He did not turn it over. He had spent 20 years being the person in any room who was furthest ahead of every other person in the room. He had built an organization on that premise. He had maintained his position through that premise. He had looked at Amara Okoye for 3 years and seen the warmth and the brilliance and the specific adaptable grace of a woman who adjusted herself to fit the space she was given. And he had calculated, wrongly, completely, with a thoroughness that was almost impressive in its totality, that adaptation meant acceptance, that someone who adjusted their grandmother's recipe would also adjust her expectations about the future, that someone who moved through his world without complaint would continue to do so regardless of what the world offered in return. He had miscalculated. He picked up his phone. 23 missed calls. 17 of them from numbers he recognized as the social and political contacts whose networks he maintained with careful investment across years. 2 from Dong Chul. 1 from Ryu. None from Taijun. He called his mother. She picked up on the first ring, which meant she was already awake, which meant she had already heard. "Jihuan," she said. He said nothing. "I heard it," she said. Her voice was the particular kind of controlled that in his mother meant something was happening underneath it that she was not going to release on a phone call. "I heard all of it." "Iyama, don't." A single word, quiet and absolute. "Don't explain it to me. I know what I heard. I know your voice." He pressed his fingers to his eyes. It was a strategic conversation. In context, in context, she let the words sit for a moment. A strategic conversation about the woman who sat at my kitchen table for 3 years and learned to make kimchi jjigae because she wanted to learn things that mattered to our family. That was the context. The organization requires. I know what the organization requires. I have known what this organization requires for 30 years. I watched it require things from your father that I will not describe to you on this phone. Her voice was very steady. I am not calling to discuss what the organization requires. I am calling to ask you one question, and I want you to answer it honestly. He waited. "Did you love her?" she said. The city outside was fully light now. The Han River was silver in the morning sun, and the towers of Gangnam were glass and steel. And the view from the 42nd floor encompassed a significant portion of the most expensive real estate in South Korea, all of it in some way connected to the organization that Ji Hwan had inherited and expanded and protected across 15 years of leadership, and none of it answered his mother's question. "Yes," he said. "Then you already know," his mother said, "what you lost." She hung up. He stood at the window for a long time. Then Min Seok-hyun called again, and this time he answered because there was still an organization to run, and the organization did not pause for its leader to stand at a window and understand the dimensions of his own failures. And Min Seok-hyun told him that Park Dong-chul was requesting an emergency meeting of the senior captains, and that 3 district lieutenants had gone off-network since the recording dropped, and that a journalist from a major outlet was requesting comment. "No comment," Ji-hwan said. "Tell Dong-chul the meeting is this afternoon. Tell the district lieutenants they have until noon to come back on network, or we'll discuss their position." He paused. "And find out where Taejun is." "Boss," Min Seok-hyun said. "Taejun, find him." He hung up. He got dressed. He went to his desk. He sat in the chair where he had sat the night he found the ring, the morning after, the 3 weeks since, and he looked at the cleared surface of the desk and the city beyond the window and the operational reports that Min Seok-hyun had already sent through for the morning, and he made himself pick up the first one and read it. He read 4 words. He put it down. He picked up his personal phone and opened a message thread and typed Amara's name into the search field and found the thread that had last been active the week before she disappeared, and he looked at the last message she'd sent him, which was a photograph of a structural diagram she'd been working on, sent at 11:30 the night before everything ended, with a single line. "Tell me if this load distribution makes sense to you, even if you don't know anything about buildings. Sometimes I just need a different eye." He had responded with a single character, a check mark. He had not looked at the diagram. He stared at the screen. Then he did something that Kong Ji-hwan, boss of the Black Serpent Syndicate, had not done since he was 17 years old and standing in a hospital corridor being told that something was over and couldn't be taken back. He typed her a message. "We need to talk. Not through lawyers, not through channels. You and me." He sent it before he could assess it. He set the phone face up on the desk and looked at it and waited. Amara's phone showed Ji Hwan's message at 8:44. She was sitting in the kitchen with Chisholm, both of them tracking the spread of the recording across various outlets on their respective laptops, and she felt the phone buzz and looked at the screen and went very still. Chisholm looked up. "What?" Amara turned the phone so she could see the screen. Chisholm read it. She looked at Amara. "Don't." "I know." "Amara, do not." "I know." She set the phone face down. She looked at her laptop screen. The recording had been shared 1,100 times in the first 2 hours. The authentication certificate was attached to every distribution. The time-stamped evidence of the real timeline was now public record in a way that no amount of Huang's narrative management could erase or reframe. She had done what she set out to do. But Jihuan's message sat on her phone face down on the kitchen table, and she could feel it there the way she could feel the weight of 3 years, which was substantial, which was the specific and unfair gravity of love that wasn't enough to save itself. Her phone buzzed again. She turned it over. Not Jihuan this time. Taejun. Min Seok-hyun is looking for me. I need to move. Can you get to the Mapo address in the next hour? Then 15 seconds later, a second message. Don't come alone. Amara stood up. Chisholm, she said. Chisholm was already reaching for her keys. They were out the door in 4 minutes. In the car, moving through the morning traffic of a city that was listening to a 14-minute recording and making its calculations, Amara held her phone in both hands and thought about what Taejun's message meant. The specific urgency of, I need to move, from a man who did not use that kind of language unless the situation had crossed from complicated into something that required immediate physical response. She typed, on our way. 20 minutes. His response was immediate. Hurry. Chisholm pushed through a yellow light and said nothing, and the city blurred past the windows, and somewhere behind them, on the 42nd floor of a building that didn't exist on any public property record, Kang Ji-hwan was reading the absence of Amara's reply and picking up his desk phone and saying to Min Seok-hyun in a voice stripped of every layer except the one underneath everything else, I need Taejun in front of me. Today, so whatever Miss Shorten. The Mapo address was a 4th-floor walk-up above a dry-cleaning shop on a street that smelled like solvent and fried food, and Taejun had been using it as a secondary location for 2 years. A place registered under a name that had no connection to the Black Serpent's organizational chart, paid in cash through a property management company that asked no questions because it was paid well enough not to need answers. He told no one about it except Baek Sung-woo, who used it once and never mentioned it again. It was the kind of place a man keeps when he understands that the work he does eventually requires an exit that nobody sees coming. He was already packed when Amara and Chisholm arrived. Not much. A bag, a hard drive, documents in a waterproof sleeve. He had the look of a man who had slept for 2 hours and spent the remaining time of the night making decisions. And when he opened the door and saw both of them, he stepped back and let them in without speaking. Chisholm looked at the bag on the floor. How bad, she said. Min Seok-hyun pulled my access to the operational network at 7 this morning. I still have my personal contacts, but the organization's infrastructure, surveillance feeds, communication channels, the financial oversight I've been running for 15 years, all of it locked out, quietly. No announcement. He looked at Amara. Ji-hwan is moving to formalize the separation before the captains can choose sides. Can they choose sides? Amara asked. Some of them. He sat down on the edge of a chair that was the room's only furniture besides a table and a cot pushed against the wall. Ryu has been with me longer than he's been with Ji-hwan. Baek's loyalty runs to me, not the organization structure. But they're not enough to change the balance, and a fight inside the Black Serpent over succession isn't something I'm willing to start. People die in those fights, people who have nothing to do with this. Amara looked at him. So what are you saying? I'm saying I'm done. He said it without drama, the same register he used for everything, low and direct and without apology. I've been done since the conference room. I just needed the organizational piece to become clear before I acted on it. Chisholm said, and when Min Seok-hyun finds this address, he won't for another few hours, maybe longer. Baek is running interference on the network search. He picked up his phone. But I got a call this morning that changes the picture for both of you. He looked at Amara. Choi Byum-seok wants to meet, not just me, both of us. He specified you by name. The room was quiet. Why? Amara said. Because old Choi has spent 30 years watching powerful men make the mistake of underestimating the women in their lives, and he has spent 30 years profiting from the aftermath. Taejun's voice was careful. He heard the recording. He pulled the alliance discussion from Ji-hwan, not because Ji-hwan is weakened. He'll survive this, we know that. But because Choi sees an opportunity in the instability. He wants to understand who the new actors are before he commits to any position. He wants to evaluate us, Chisholm said. He wants to evaluate her, Taejun said. I'm the context. She's what interests him. Amara looked at the bag on the floor and the hard drive and the waterproof sleeve of documents and the specific spare clarity of a room that a careful man uses as a last option. She thought about Park Ji-young and the 14 minutes and the distribution strategy and the recording spreading across Seoul's networks at a rate that made suppression pointless, and she thought about what it meant to be interesting to a man like Choi Byung-seok. "Set the meeting," she said. Tae-jun looked at her for a moment, then he picked up his phone. They met Choi Byung-seok at noon in a private room of a restaurant in Cheongdam-dong that was not the same restaurant where he'd met Ji-hwan, which was a deliberate signal. He was there when they arrived, which was another signal. Old Choi didn't wait for people, so choosing to be early meant he was treating this as his meeting rather than an accommodation. He was 71 and looked 62, with white hair and the careful stillness of a man whose body had learned to conserve energy across decades of maintaining a position that required constant vigilance. He looked at Amara the way she imagined he looked at buildings he was considering purchasing, assessing structural integrity before committing to the price. He did not look at Tae-jun with anything except the comfortable familiarity of knowing exactly what he was dealing with. "Sit," he said. They sat. "The recording," he said to Amara without preamble. "Your idea or the lawyer's?" "Mine," she said. "Timing." "Also mine." He nodded once, a small movement that communicated something she couldn't quite read. "You held it for weeks." "I needed to understand what I was dealing with before I used it." "And Huang's distribution moving first would have changed the calculus." "Yes?" He picked up his tea. He held it without drinking. "I've done business with Kang Ji-hwan for 11 years. He's a precise operator, controlled. He does not make emotional decisions." A pause. "He made several in the last month." Tae-jun said nothing. "I'm not interested in his emotional decisions," Choi said. "I'm interested in what comes next." He set the tea down. He looked at Amara directly. "You're an architect." "Yes." "Structural work." "Primarily residential. Some commercial." "You had a project portfolio before Seoul." "Lagos, London, 2 years in Amsterdam." He nodded. "I have a development project in Mapogu that has been stalled for 14 months because the original structural firm filed incorrect load calculations and the city refused the permit revision." He looked at her without blinking. "I'm not offering you anything because of what happened between you and Ji-hwan. I want to be explicit about that." "I understand. I'm offering you a conversation about a project because you appear to be someone who tells the truth about load calculations even when it's inconvenient, and I have spent 14 months dealing with people who don't." He picked up his tea again. "If the conversation produces something workable, we discuss terms. If it doesn't, we finish lunch and you leave with nothing owed in either direction." Amara looked at him for a moment, at the careful architecture of a man who had survived 30 years in a world that ate careful men for breakfast, and had done it by being more careful than anyone else in the room. "I'd like to see the permit revision documents," she said. The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. "They'll be at your lawyer's office this afternoon." He looked at Tae-jun. "And you," he said. "I'm done with organizational work," Tae-jun said. "I'm not asking you about organizational work. I'm asking what you intend to do with the next 20 years. Tae-jun looked at him steadily. "I intend to figure that out." Fair answer. Choi stood. For a man of 71, he moved without effort, without the specific carefulness of age that Amara had expected. "One more thing." He looked at Amara. "Ji-hwan will reach out to you again." "He already has, I imagine." She said nothing, which was its own confirmation. "What you do with that is entirely your choice," Choi said. "But I'll tell you what I've observed in 30 years of watching men like him operate. They don't reach out because they've changed. They reach out because silence is the one thing they have no response for." He straightened his jacket. "Don't give him a response. Let him sit with it." He left. The room held his absence for a moment. Chisholm exhaled. Tae-jun looked at Amara. She looked at the space where Choi Byung-seok had been and thought about load calculations and permit revisions and 14 months of stalled work, and she felt something shift in her chest that was not hope exactly, but was the structural precursor to it, the thing that has to stabilize before the weight can be loaded. Ji-hwan was in his penthouse when Min Seo-kyun confirmed that Tae-jun had left the Mapo address before they could reach it, that Baek Sung-woo had resigned his position effective immediately with no explanation, and that Ryu had requested a leave of absence citing personal reasons. Min Seok-hyun delivered all three pieces of information in a single phone call, in order of ascending significance, the way he had learned to structure difficult news for Ji-hwan across 15 years. Smallest first, largest last. No editorializing. Ji-hwan listened to all of it. Taejun's organizational access, he said. Already locked out. 7 this morning. His financial accounts connected to the Black Serpent structure. Frozen pending formal separation. Personal funds? Not our reach. I know. He moved to the window. Ryu's leave request. Approved or denied? Min Seok-hyun paused. Boss, if we deny it and he's already approved, Ji-hwan said, let him go cleanly. Same for Beck. Another pause. If they want to leave, they leave with what they've earned. I won't chase them. Min Seok-hyun's silence communicated something that might have been surprise. Send Dong-chul to me, Ji-hwan said, this afternoon. He hung up. He stood at the window for a long time. The senior captain meeting had been difficult in the way that meetings were difficult when everything being said was technically about operational matters and actually about something that couldn't be named directly. Dong-chul had run the financial review with his eyes on his documents. The two remaining district bosses had asked questions that were precise and relevant and gave nothing away about their personal assessments. The meeting had lasted 40 minutes and had resolved nothing except the surface layer of the day's business. Ji-hwan had run organizations. He understood what a room felt like when its center of gravity had shifted, and nobody was yet willing to acknowledge the shift publicly. The room had felt like that. Taejun's absence from the table had been the loudest thing in it. He opened his laptop and pulled up the recording. He had made himself listen to it once, in full, in the early morning before Min Seok-hyun's first call. He had listened to Amar's voice describe the partition and the amber light and the captain's voices and his own voice, and he had listened without stopping it and without looking away from the screen, and when it ended he had sat with the specific experience of hearing yourself reduced to evidence. She had been 40 feet away. He had been explaining, calmly and without hesitation, why she didn't fit the future he was building. She had been standing 40 feet away holding food she'd adjusted for him, and she had heard every word, and she had made a decision in those 13 minutes that she had then executed with a precision and a completeness that he still, weeks later, found himself unable to fully accommodate. Because he had spent 20 years being the person who moved first and moved cleanly and left no opening, and she had done that. She had done it in 13 minutes without training and without resources and without the organizational infrastructure he had spent 2 decades building, and she had done it better than he would have. He closed the laptop. He looked at Amar's last message on his phone. The structural diagram. Tell me if this load distribution makes sense to you. He had sent a check mark. He had not looked at the diagram. He pulled it up now, zoomed in. It was a residential project. He could tell from the scale, the ceiling heights marked in the corner, the notation style that he recognized as hers from the years he'd watched her work at the kitchen counter of the penthouse late at night. The load distribution in the central span was elegant in a way he could appreciate even without technical knowledge. The kind of solution that looked simple and was actually the result of someone having worked through every more complicated option first and found the clean path through all of them. She had sent him this at 11:30 the night before he had described her as not a factor. She had been working late, and she had wanted casually and without ceremony to show him something she'd made. He set the phone face down on the desk. He picked up his desk phone and called Huang and told him to stand down on every remaining distribution initiative. Huang said the damage was already done to several of the channels, and Ji-hwan said he understood, stop anyway. Huang said understood and asked no further questions because that was what Huang was paid to do. He sat in the chair. Dong-chul arrived at 4, and they spent an hour on the financial restructuring that the Choi Alliance withdrawal required. Dong-chul was thorough and professional, and at no point during the meeting did he say anything about Taejun or the recording or the last month, which Ji-hwan recognized as loyalty of a specific and impersonal kind. The loyalty of a man who serves the position rather than the person, which was the most durable kind and also the most honest. When Dong-chul left, Ji-hwan sat alone. He had been sitting alone in this penthouse for weeks, and he had not previously noticed the quality of it. He noticed it now. The way the space held sound differently without another person present. The way the kitchen had a specific emptiness that was not architectural, but was about the absence of someone who used to stand at the counter and adjust recipes and ask structural questions at 11:30 at night and fill the space with something that was not decorative but was essential in a way he had not recognized as essential until it was comprehensively absent. He picked up his phone. He opened Amar's thread. He looked at his own message from the morning. "We need to talk. Not through lawyers, not through channels, you and me." No reply. He stared at the screen for a long time. Then he typed, "I listened to the recording. I know you were in the foyer. I've known since the security log that morning. I should have said that sooner." He paused. "I'm not going to tell you I didn't mean what I said. You deserve more than that. I meant it in the way that men mean things when they're building structures and treating people like materials. I was wrong. Not about the structure, about treating you like a material." He looked at what he'd written. He sent it. He set the phone down. He did not expect a reply. He did not receive one. Amara read the message 2 hours after it arrived, sitting at the small desk in the spare room with the Mapogu development document spread around her laptop. She read it twice. She sat with it for a long moment. Then she set the phone face down and went back to the permit revision documents. She found the load calculation error on the 3rd page. It was the kind of mistake that happened when a structural engineer trusted their modeling software more than their instincts. The software had optimized for material cost, and the engineer had accepted the output without checking it against the actual soil composition data in the site survey, which showed a variance in the eastern quadrant that the model hadn't weighted correctly. Fix the eastern quadrant. Recalculate the central span with the corrected soil data. Refile the permit revision with the corrected documentation. It was solvable. She made a note and closed the folder and looked at the wall of the spare room and thought about Jihuan's message. "I was wrong. Not about the structure. About treating you like a material." It was the most honest thing he had said to her in 3 years, possibly in his life, and it had arrived too late with a precision that was almost unbearable. The exact right words at the exact wrong time, which was the specific and exhausting irony of a man who had always been good with strategy and never learned that some things couldn't be recovered through the right move at the right moment. She didn't reply. Not out of cruelty. Out of the specific self-knowledge of a woman who understood that replying to Jihuan's honesty, however real, would reopen a door that she had spent considerable cost closing, and the cost had been real, and she was not willing to spend it again on someone who had required a public crisis to find his honesty. She picked up Taejun's thread instead. "The load issue is fixable. I'll have a preliminary correction framework to Park Ji-young by morning." His reply came in under a minute. "Choi's going to be pleased." She typed, "How are you?" A longer pause this time. "Honestly? Like a man who just walked out of a building he's been inside for 20 years and forgot that outside has weather. A beat. It's cold, but it's air." She smiled at the phone. It was the first time in weeks that smiling had felt like something she'd chosen, rather than something she was performing. "Get some sleep," she typed. "We have a meeting with a 71-year-old crime patriarch's lawyers tomorrow morning, and I need you functional." "Yes, ma'am," he wrote back. She set the phone down and looked at the permit revision documents and the structural diagram she'd already started sketching in the margin of the cover page, and she felt the particular forward-leaning quality of a problem that has a solution and a person who knows how to find it. 3 months moved through Seoul the way Seoul's winters always did, without ceremony, without gentleness, the cold doing its work and the city continuing regardless. The Black Serpent Syndicate did not collapse. Jihuan had been right about that. He was too embedded, too careful, too structurally essential to the criminal ecology of his particular geography to be brought down by a recording and the withdrawal of one alliance partner. Dong-chul ran the financial restructuring with the competence of a man who had been preparing for contingencies his entire career. 2 of the 3 district lieutenants who had gone off-network came back. The 3rd started his own operation in the northwestern districts, which Ji Huan allowed because the cost of preventing it exceeded the cost of tolerating it. The Choi family negotiated a modified arrangement eventually, not an alliance, not a marriage, but a territorial understanding that gave both organizations operational clarity without requiring either to commit to the other's future. Choi Byom-seok, in the private way of men who moved at the speed of tectonic plates, was satisfied with this outcome. He had what he wanted, which was not Ji Huan's strength but his predictability, and the modified arrangement gave him that. Amara filed the corrected permit revision for the Mapogu development in the second month, and the city approved it in the third. She set up a small practice with Chisom as her operational manager. Chisom, who had a degree she'd never fully used, and a talent for making complex logistical problems vanish, that she had always applied informally and could now apply with a salary attached. They worked out of a rented office in Mapogu that had good natural light and a window that looked onto a street where people walked dogs in the morning, and the particular noise of ordinary life was the dominant sound. Taejun spent the first month in a state of structured stillness, paying attention to what he wanted to do with days that were no longer organized around the Black Serpent's operational calendar. He found, with some surprise, that he wanted to cook. Not professionally, he had no illusions about his skill level, but with the specific intention of a man learning something for his own reasons. He started with Korean dishes he'd eaten his whole life and understood at the level of consumption rather than construction. He moved, by the second month, to Nigerian recipes sourced from a cookbook Chisom had given him with the specific dryness of a woman who was not endorsing anything, simply providing a resource. The Ofe Onugbu defeated him 3 times. The bitterness was the problem. The balance of it, when to add what, how to let the flavors build without overwhelming the base. He called Chisom's mother in Lagos on the 3rd attempt, using a number Amara had given him with a look that contained an entire conversation's worth of meaning, and Chisom's mother spent 45 minutes on the phone with a man she had never met, walking him through every step with the patient precision of a woman who understood that food was not incidental. The 4th attempt was right. He brought it to the Mapogu office on a Tuesday in the 3rd month and set it on the table in the small kitchen and said nothing, and Chisom lifted the lid and smelled it, and looked at him with the expression she reserved for things she was not yet willing to admit. Impressed her, and Amara tasted it and closed her eyes for a moment and opened them and said, "It's not the same as my grandmother's?" He looked at her. "My grandmother's is better," she said, "but this is very good." He sat down at the table. She sat across from him. Through the window, the Mapogu street was doing its ordinary Tuesday business, and somewhere below them the city was running its enormous and indifferent machinery, and the two of them sat in the kitchen of a small architectural practice and ate the meal he had made and did not talk about Jihuan or the Black Serpent or the recording or the 42nd floor or any of it, because those things did not require more conversation. They required exactly what they were receiving, which was the slow and patient process of becoming the past. After a while, Chisom came in from the front office and looked at the pot and got herself a bowl without asking and sat down. And the 3 of them ate together in the particular companionable silence of people who have been through something difficult and have arrived, without ceremony, at the other side of it. Jihuan came to the office once. It was a Wednesday morning, the 9th week, and Amara was alone because Chisom had a site visit and Taejun was meeting with a contractor. She heard the knock and opened the door and found Jihuan in a plain coat, no security visible, which meant either they were close enough to be redundant or he had made a deliberate choice to come without them. She looked at him. He looked older than he had 3 months ago, which was not a physical aging so much as a quality of having put something down that he had been carrying for a long time. He was still exactly himself, precise and controlled, and with the specific presence of a man who occupied a room's center of gravity as a matter of physics rather than intention. But something underneath it had changed in a way she could see because she had spent 3 years watching him closely enough to know what change looked like on his particular face. "I'm not going to ask to come in," he said. She leaned against the doorframe, said nothing. "I wanted to see the office," he said. "I heard about the Mapo project." A pause. "I heard it was good work." "It was a calculation error in the original permit filing. It wasn't complicated." "You found it in an afternoon. 3 firms looked at it for 14 months. She said nothing. He looked past her into the office briefly. The natural light, the drafting table, the window with the ordinary street below, and then looked back at her. "I'm not here to ask for anything," he said. "I want to be clear about that. I know. I'm here because I owe you a conversation that isn't managed through anyone else and doesn't have an agenda attached to it." He looked at her directly. "I did what I did. I'm not going to qualify it or explain the organizational logic or ask you to weigh it against the 3 years before it. I said what I said. You heard it. You were 40 feet away and I didn't know, and I would have said exactly the same things if I'd known, which is the part I have to live with." Amara looked at him. at the man she had adjusted her grandmother's recipe for, at the man who had moved her textile to the guest room and pressed her thumb to a scanner and said he wanted her to be able to reach him anytime and had meant it with whatever portion of himself was capable of meaning things completely. "I know," she said again, quieter this time. "I loved you," he said, improperly, inside a structure that didn't have room for what that should have meant. "But I loved you." The Mapogu street made its noise below them. Somewhere down the block, a delivery vehicle was double parked, and someone was complaining about it with the cheerful persistence of a person who has nothing more pressing to address. Ordinary life, running its ordinary machinery. "I know that too," Amara said. He nodded. Once. The same small movement old Choi had made at lunch, and the movement of a man receiving information he will carry forward without requiring more of it. "The work will be good," he said, about the office. About her. "Yes," she said. "It will." He left. She watched him walk down the stairs through the small window at the end of the hallway, watched him reach the street and move into it and become one more person in Seoul's ordinary Wednesday morning traffic, and she stood at the window until she couldn't see him anymore, and then stood there a moment longer just to be certain. And then she went back to her desk and opened the permit file for a residential project in Yongsan-gu that a small developer had brought in last week, and she found her place in the load calculation and continued from where she had left off. Later that evening, Tai-jun stopped by the office after his contractor meeting and found her still at the desk and made tea in the small kitchen without being asked. He set a cup on the corner of her desk and leaned against the doorframe between the kitchen and the main room. "Chisholm said Ji Hwan came by," he said. "Yes." He looked at her. "You all right?" She picked up the tea. It was the right temperature. He always let it cool to the right temperature before he brought it. She had noticed that some time ago and had not mentioned it and was not going to mention it now. Some things did their work more effectively without being named. "Yes," she said. He looked at the Yongsan-gu file spread across her desk. "What is it?" "Residential. 4 stories, mixed occupancy ground floor. The developer wants to maximize the upper floor footprint, but the site survey shows a drainage issue on the eastern boundary that complicates the foundation depth." She looked up. "It's interesting." He came away from his doorframe and pulled the chair from across the desk and sat down and looked at the site survey she turned toward him. He studied it for a moment, not with a structural engineer's knowledge, but with the attention of a man who had learned to look at things carefully because careful looking had kept him alive across 20 years in environments that punished the incurious. "The eastern boundary," he said. "Here." She pointed. He looked at where she was pointing. He looked at the rest of the survey. "Could you move the foundation anchor point?" "That's one option." She pulled the survey closer. "It adds cost, but it might be cleaner than trying to address the drainage separately." "Cleaner is usually worth the cost," he said. She looked at him. He was looking at the survey. His face in the office light had the particular quality of a man who was present, not strategizing, not managing, not running any calculation about position or leverage or what the next move should be. Just present, in a room with a woman and a structural problem and a cup of tea cooling on the desk corner. "Yes," she said, "it usually is." Outside the window, Seoul was moving into its evening, the city's light shifting from the white efficiency of working hours into the warmer, denser glow of the night, the towers beginning their transformation and the streets below filling with the specific human traffic of people finishing one part of the day and moving toward whatever came next. It was a city that had been absorbing people's stories for a long time without pausing to mark any single one of them, and it absorbed this one too. A woman at a desk in Mapogu with a structural problem and a cup of tea. A man in the chair across from her who had learned to make ofe, onugbu, correctly on the 4th attempt, and the ordinary and sufficient fact of 2 people who had each paid the full price of where they'd been and were now, without fanfare and without the need for any further explanation, exactly where they had chosen to be. She picked up her pencil. She made a note in the margin of the survey. Anchor relocation, Eastern Quad, consult drainage report, page 7. And the pencil made its small sound against the paper, and the city made its large sound outside the glass, and the evening continued.